Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in this evening. It's great to have so many people here interested in learning more, to be inspired, and also to help save our songbirds. And our hummingbirds. SOS Save Our Songbirds is an action campaign that is intended to help people take 3 easy steps around home to help songbirds. The first one is to add some native plants that will help feed and shelter birds. A second, and that's what we're about tonight, is to prevent birds from colliding with windows. And a third one is to buy coffee that's grown on farms that protect our birds' winter habitat. And so today we're going to be focusing in on that second step, as well as how to attract and feed hummingbirds. And it's important at this time of the year because fall migration is one of the worst time for bird collisions. And so if we can take some steps after hearing from Brenna tonight, that's going to be great for our birds. As well, hummingbirds are very vulnerable to window collisions, and Brenna addresses that a little bit later. So anything we can do now will not only help hummingbirds, but will help other birds this fall. And if you're interested in learning about the other 2 actions that we promote, some of our events, and then how you can get involved, I encourage you to visit our website, which is sossaveoursongbirds.org. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Brenna, and thank you again for the presentations tonight.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm just going to punt it right on over to you, Michael and Kathi, to jump right into our talk about hummingbirds.
Okay, thank you, Brenna. So I'm Michael Rock, Kathi Rock next to me. We've been gardening for hummingbirds on the near west side of Madison for more than 25 years. So we have quite a bit of experience. We have books, we have videos. We participate in an online email listserv called HumNet, which is not that active these days. There's a web-based group called the Hummingbird Forum, which is active, and we've learned quite a bit from those members. We wanted to share with you what we've done to attract hummingbirds to our yard. I enjoy the gardening just as much as Kathi, but I'm going to talk about hummingbirds in general and the feeders, and Kathy's going to talk about the gardening aspect. So let me share our screen. All right. So that's Milwaukee in the background. This was on our anniversary. We were there a number of years ago, and the bird of interest for us is the ruby-throated hummingbird. Many of you probably already know this, but hummingbirds are only in the New World. There are no hummingbirds in Europe or Asia or Africa, although there have been fossilized remains of hummingbirds found in Germany. So at one point, hummingbirds were in the Old World, but no longer. So only North America, Central America, and South America. Approximately 360 to 380 species. The highest number of species at the equator. And as you go north and south of the equator, fewer and fewer hummingbirds. 16 to 18 that come to the United States, but there's only one nesting species east of the Great Plains, and that is the ruby-throated hummingbird. The majority of the pictures, not all of them, will be from our yard. We have some pictures from some other hummingbird gardeners and photographers that we've sprinkled into the presentation. In the original email announcement that Brenna sent out, she talked about their wing beat, how many times per minute they flick their tongues in and out of feeders or flowers to lap up the nectar. There's all sorts of superlatives that belong to hummingbirds and no other bird. Number one, the smallest bird in the entire world is the Cuban bee hummingbird. So it's just tiny, tiny, tiny. Hummingbirds range in size from the Cuban bee hummingbird to the giant hummingbird. Ruby-throated hummingbird is considered a small to medium-sized hummingbird. This is a hatch year male. And so I said hatch year, Y-E-A-R, not ear as in your ear, but hatch year male. That is a term that banders use when they describe hummingbirds. They are either hatch year or after hatch year birds. So hatch year technically is more accurate than calling them juveniles or immatures. This is a hatch year male, and he's a male because he's got tippling or a 5 o'clock shadow here in his throat area, one little iridescent feather coming in right here, and then this is some fight damage right below his throat area, the upper part of his chest. Hummingbirds are highly territorial, and we see them have these fantastic dog fights in the air above our yard. He's got white tips to his tail feathers. The the after hatch year and the hatch year females would pretty much look identical. They would have clear throats, and they both have white tips to their tail feathers. When this hatch year male turns over 1 year of age, then he's an after hatch year male or an adult male. So notice now he has no longer has any white tips to his tail feathers. He has a deeply forked tail. And then the throat area, which is technically called the gorget, is totally filled in with these feathers that reflect light. Now you might be thinking it's ruby-throated hummingbird. This is not a ruby red color. It's kind of a muddy color. Well, he's looking off to his left. The color does not come from pigment. It comes from a microscopic property in the feathers. There's something called melanosomes, and the bird and the sun and the observer will all be lined up properly for the right wavelength of light to be reflected back to your eye. There was an outstanding article about this published in the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's uh, magazine, which was published, gosh, maybe 6 months to a year ago. Anyway, the next inset will show you an example of how you get that reflection of the light back to your eye. This is another hatch year male. Unlike the one in the middle, he has multiple gorget feathers that now have that microscopic property. He's going to turn just a little bit towards my camera, and there's the gorget flash. And I did not use a flash on the camera. This is natural daylight. So imagine when their gorget is totally filled in, how brilliant that would be. And the after hatch year birds do these U-shaped dives with a female at the bottom of the U, and they use that gorget flash to attract the female. So that's what they look like, and here's what they sound like. Oops, wasn't supposed to do that. Let's go back. Can everyone hear that? No, I
The
think
sound
I
is
maybe
excellent.
I let me stop sharing for a moment. I think I forgot to click the button about sharing sound. Okay. Now we got it. Okay. All right. So you can hear the buzzing of their wings, and then that's their vocalizations, which we call chittering. And we hear quite a bit of that later in the season when the birds are migrating through our yard. So this is the only nesting species of hummingbird you would see in Wisconsin, but not necessarily the only hummingbird that is here. Every year, every state, essentially east of the Great Plains, east of the Mississippi, will have a rufous. The rufous nest in the Pacific Northwest of the US, the western coast of Canada, and up into Alaska. And like the ruby-throated hummingbirds, they are supposed to migrate to Mexico and Central America. But every year, some of these wander into Wisconsin. In fact, this past fall in 2023, there was an adult male rufous that was at the Governor Nelson State Park on the north side of Madison. The ranger station at the entrance has a hummingbird feeder, and they had this type of bird that was going to this feeder. This is from our friends Larry and Emily, who live on an old farm outside of Whitewater, and Larry is an outstanding photographer. So I was starting to talk about the superlative things of hummingbirds, and I got kind of off track, but they hover almost effortlessly in one position. They can fly backwards, the only bird that can do that. only bird that can temporarily fly upside down, fastest heart rate, fastest respiratory rate of any bird. So just amazing everything that hummingbirds can do. So we live on the near west side of Madison. And if we zoom in, you can see the Blackhawk Country Club at the top of the slide, University Avenue, Oscar Redebon Park. The letter A is where we are at. And we're right in the city, an urban location, but we have been able to attract hummingbirds by many, many feeders and many, many flowers. Right now, I have 1 feeder up in the front yard and 5 feeders up in the backyard. During the peak of the migration in late August to September, my feeder total would probably be close to 15 to 20 feeders. And we just have a little 1/3 of an acre house with houses on either side of us, house across the street from us. The U-shaped buildings is the Monticello apartment complex. And we've been able to attract hummingbirds by going way overboard. We're kind of nuts when it comes to attracting hummingbirds, but maybe nuts in a good way. So with the feeders, you put nectar in the feeders, and there's 2 things you can do. You could get a pre-made nectar mix, and I have a slash through that because many of the nectar mixes have red food coloring in them. And when you think about natural flower nectar, it is clear. It's the red on the feeder that attracts the hummingbird. So you don't need to do this. Possibly harmful to hummingbirds. One of our hummingbird videos shows a hummingbird bander that has a bird in hand, and he talks about the bird urinating red urine. He knew that bird had visited a feeder with red nectar. It doesn't sound like a good thing to be passing red urine. And you're also paying top dollar when you get the instant nectar, so it's much easier to make your own. And it's a ratio of 4 parts water to 1 part sugar. Some people say to boil the water to sterilize it, but as soon as you hang it outside, it's no longer sterile. So I use hot water from the tap. Uh, it should be only regular granulated sugar, like what you would bake with. So don't use honey, don't use brown sugar, uh, don't use artificial sweetener. I've seen some people say, well, gosh, maybe it's bad for hummingbirds to be eating so much sugar. We're going to use Splenda in our feeders. No, that's not going to work. Yeah, or organic sugar.
It has added iron.
So what Kathy said is that the organic sugar has added iron, and that's not good for the birds. The nectar will get moldy and cloudy, particularly in hotter weather. So you do need to clean the feeders and replace the nectar. There are different kinds of mops and brushes you can purchase. Something I will do approximately once a month is to soak my feeders into 10 to 1 water to bleach solution. And unlike the nectar solution in which I'm measuring exact proportions of water and sugar, I don't measure anything exactly here. I've got water in the kitchen sink, put in a splash of bleach, let the feeders soak in there for 10 minutes, rinse them, and then that really gets the mold out quite nicely. So, a couple of feeders that are favored in our yard. This is the original name for this was the Perky Pet Four Fountains feeder. It's now called the Pinch Waist feeder. And the hummingbirds really like to use this feeder. It comes with these fake red gloxinia flowers that are on the feeding ports. I take those off because they're really not necessary. When the feeders swing in the wind, then nectar will pool at the bottom of that plastic flower, and that attracts even more bees and yellow jackets. Right now, for the Four Fountains feeders that I have out in the yard, I don't even have these yellow bee guards on them. I will need to get those on in August because that's when the bees and the yellow jackets become a problem. This is a hatch year male. I'm sorry, this is an after hatch year male. He's an adult male because his gorget's totally fully filled in. And this is near our small garden pond. All these white dots in the background is the sun illuminating our mister, which is spraying mist up into the air. The other feeder that is used quite a bit in our yard is the First Nature feeder, another after hatch year male. This is early in the spring. It's hanging right outside of our dining room window. It's less than 3 feet from our window. And that will become important a little bit later. This old style has these big holes in it for the bird to place its bill into. Uh, Later in the season, yellow jackets get inside here, but you are able to twist off the bottom from the top of the feeder and wash those out. First Nature has redesigned this feeder to have two parallel slots, but the concern about that is if a bird has a bill in the feeder, another one wants to engage in it in a fight, it might try to exit the feeder, not necessarily pulling its head straight out, but fly somewhat laterally away from the feeder and damage its bill. So we think that that could be dangerous. If you purchase one of those feeders with the two parallel slits, you can enlarge them with either a hot glue gun or a soldering iron. And that's what I've done with the new style of that feeder. Now, people have always asked me, have I ever found a hummingbird nest? And the answer is no. I would love to find one someday, but they're teeny, teeny, tiny. Uh, the volume of the nest is, think about a walnut. Cut the walnut in half. That's the volume of the nest. The opening of the top of the nest that the bird's sitting on is about the diameter of a quarter. The female alone, she is a superstar. She alone builds the nest. She puts it usually on a down-sloping branch, and that's because even though she has a canopy of leaves above her that protects the nest from rain, if any water gets through, it will run down the branch. She camouflages it with lichens. This again is from our friend Larry and Emily in Whitewater. Their son saw the female go to the nest, and that's how he found the nest. And you can recognize the shape of the leaves. It's a maple tree. So she alone does all the work. She lays 2 eggs, and the eggs are the size of Tic Tacs. She incubates the eggs, she feeds the chicks, and then they fledge. So just amazing what the mother hummingbird can do. With that, I believe it's time for me to pass the baton to Kathi, and she'll talk about the guardian aspect of this.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I just wanted to show this beautiful book called Hummingbird Gardens, written by Nancy Newfield. She's a master hummingbird banner in the New Orleans area, and she autographed this for us. And she said, Hummingbird Gardens make hummingbird magic. So I hope that I can impart a little bit of that magic to you tonight and share with you some ways that you can really bring more hummingbirds into your garden with both native plants and a few exotic plants that don't threaten our environment. So Michael spoke about the feeders so beautifully. And I just wanted to say one more thing about the nectar mixes. Uh, some of them don't contain any red food coloring, but all of them contain preservatives, which have been found to be harmful to the birds. So would really encourage you to use just the granulated table sugar and water and nothing else in feeders. And the feeders are so valuable because they fill in the spots when there aren't any really great flowers blooming for hummingbirds, or those flowers might be unavailable to hummingbirds. For example, in the spring, when the birds first arrive, there's really not a lot in bloom. Things like daffodils don't really attract hummingbirds. And then also on a rainy day or a hot day when the nectar might be diluted or unavailable. And then in the fall, after we get our first frost of the season, when a lot of the flowers really start to fade. And then our next element would be trees and shrubs for cover perching and preening. Having thick shrubbery and trees in and around your property is really valuable. Hummingbirds spend about 75% of their time perching. They're preening, cleaning their feathers, just looking around. And then, of course, at night, they need somewhere to rest during the night and to escape from predators just like other birds do. So the more trees and thick shrubbery you can incorporate without creating too much shade in your yard, which would be not beneficial for a garden, would be extremely helpful. Those trees and shrubs also encourage the presence of the tiny little insects that hummingbirds depend on for their survival, in addition to nectar. And then specific flowers, shrubs, and vines that have nectar that attract hummingbirds. Without that nectar reward, they can use it for the other purposes, but for food, they really need nectar. And then Michael talked about our small garden pond. It's very beneficial for birds generally to have a source of running water. Our pond is very shallow, which is great for hummingbirds, given that hummingbirds are the size of your thumb. They might actually drown in a conventional bird bath. So you really need to provide that source of shallow moving water. And then kind of a fun element called hummingbird beacons. Sometimes I will use red ribbons or silk flowers to draw hummingbirds in the spring. Hummingbirds can see red for up to a quarter of a mile away. So it's something that you can add, especially before we have very much that's in bloom in the spring. So this is an overview photo of our front yard, and you can see that we use a lot of containers for plants. It really helps to be able to use a lighter soil mix. Our property is on what used to be a university farm, so the soil is very heavy and rich, which sometimes doesn't work for a lot of hummingbird plants. And also, you can create more heat by placing those containers on the hot cement. And as we spoke about in the earlier presentation, someone was saying, well, with all the rain we're getting this season, a lot of my plants are failing. Well, if you try growing them in a container, then you can easily move them out of the rain before that rain starts to prevent too much rain getting into your plant. So that's another benefit of containers. A container also makes a shorter plant taller. Taller plants are always valuable for hummingbirds. They don't want to be too close to the ground. There could be a house cat lurking there or some other predator. When we moved into our home, absolutely none of this was here. It was all turf grass, hummingbird unfriendly shrubbery, and too many trees. So we've really totally transformed our yard into hummingbird heaven. And that heaven is especially there in mid-September during the fall migration, and we hope that some of you might join us for our hummingbird garden tours, which we offer to the community every year. This is our new salvia garden, which we started last year, actually, and it's really amazing how many different salvias, different colors and heights, and so many hummingbirds are attracted to all of the nectar-filled tubular flowers. They feed about every 15 minutes, so you really need to have a lot of flowers always available to hummingbirds over the long season from early May when they arrive until mid-October when they depart. And I don't have to tell this group this, I'm sure, but it's really important to garden organically as much as possible and to never use pesticides in your yard because you could actually be killing hummingbirds and certainly are killing the tiny little insects that they depend on to survive. So let's look at some of the specific uh, plants. These are mostly native plants, a few perennials thrown in. We think the best perennial native plant in our yard for hummingbirds is Lonicera sempervirens or trumpet honeysuckle. It begins blooming in late spring. Its heaviest bloom is late spring, early summer, but it blooms sporadically throughout the season. And we have hummingbirds constantly checking this vine out. You can see it's the ideal configuration of a hummingbird flower. It's a single flower tube with a nectar reward at the end of the tube. And uh, the hummingbird finds that nectar very easy to access, and it's always available to them. You do need a strong support structure for the vine and sun. Most hummingbird plants do require at least some sun, if not full sun, especially here in cooler Wisconsin. And I will say again, I'm sure I don't have to mention this to this group. Japanese honeysuckle is highly attractive to hummingbirds, but we discourage people from planting that vine because it's very threatening to native flora. So stick with this one, which is a very well controlled vine that will bloom the very first year it's planted. This is Monarda didyma Jacob Klein. There are lots of different Monardas available. The native one is Monarda fistulosa, which we also grow in our yard, but we have not seen any hummingbird interest in that one, which is really unfortunate. But this red one is just wonderful for hummingbirds and other pollinators. Its only downfall is that it kind of peters out by the end of August and is not available for the fall migration. But it's still a great garden plant. At the Mount Cuba Center, they studied different Monardas and they found that the Monarda didyma Jacob Klein most consistently attracted hummingbirds. And I also feel that it's the least aggressive of all the different bee balms. And it does grow in some shade, which is very helpful to us with the ever increasing shade that we have going on our property. Lobelia cardinalis or cardinal flower is really the best native plant for hummingbirds. You can see the hummingbird has a little yellow dot on its head. So it's deriving nectar, the nectar reward, but it's also pollinating the flower. Uh, this is a plant that I think was here way before any of us were, that hummingbirds were using. There were no hummingbird feeders before there were people, obviously, and very valuable plant. Likes morning sun, afternoon shade, and a very rich, heavy soil. If you have more of a sandy soil type, you might struggle with this one, and you might want to grab a native Agastaki instead, which does like full sun and well-drained soil. So a few other great native plants for hummingbirds. This is Silene regia or royal catchfly, which blooms during the summer and is wonderful for hummingbirds. It does require a sunny location. We have this blooming right now, actually, and it will probably bloom through about mid-August. Again, I wish this one bloomed into September. So that is the difficult part about native plants. Cup plant is another great native plant. Hummingbirds will use the composite flowers. They might find small insects in the flowers, but the cups of the leaves also catch water when it rains, and it can be used as a little mini bird bath. So that's kind of a fun aspect of this native plant. It's very tall, requires a lot of space, and can be a little bit aggressive in certain soils. So you might want to take care with that. We grow both purple turtle's head, pink turtle's head, and white turtle's head in our yard. We've seen some use of all of those turtle's heads. They do love a heavy, rich soil. The pink one blooms more into September. So we have seen some use of that native plant, and it's a very stunning plant when in flower. The one salvia that's native to our area and perennial in our area is called Salvia azurea, which blooms in September. It's very tall with brilliant blue flowers, and it is available from the Prairie Nursery and Prairie Moon Nursery by mail order. So a beautiful salvia if you have the room for it. So let's move on to just very quickly to two annual or exotic plants that can be easily grown in containers. And neither of these plants will threaten native flora in any way. They're just very simple annuals. They die at the end of the season. They never reseed. They never do anything beyond that season. The first one is Mexican cigar plant, which is native to Texas, actually, uh, and Mexico. It has these single tubular flowers, which are orange and look like tiny little lit cigars. It's very valuable because it's always in bloom from the time that you plant it in early May all the way through October, is self-cleaning and can be very easily grown in containers or hanging baskets. The Kupfia vermillionaire, which you can find at any local nursery, is very useful in the same way. So if you want something for like a patio, a hanging basket, it would be just ideal, and hummingbirds love this plant. The second one is called Annie's sage or Salvia gornitica, native to South America. Very beautiful tall garden plant, but it can still be grown in containers. This is Salvia gornitica black and blue, which has these very attractive black bracts. Um, our friend Nancy Newfield, who I spoke about earlier, has a device called a refractometer, and she's found of all hummingbird plants, the Salvia gornitica contains the highest amount of nectar for hummingbirds. So extremely valuable plant. And then friendship sage is another type of Salvia gornitica that's taller and perhaps even longer blooming. Again, just dies at the end of the season, never reseeds, never grows beyond that. So it's a very beautiful plant that's garnered many awards in the gardening world, even in places where they don't have hummingbirds. And then Texas sage, which obviously is native to Texas, it's a very easy to grow salvia in Wisconsin, very long blooming, easy to grow from seed, great to grow in containers. It might do a little bit of reseeding, but nothing major. It certainly is not going to threaten any native plant gardens that you're growing at all. So it's a fun little annual to grow in containers. So I'd like to turn the program back to Michael.
Okay, thank you, Kathi. Uh, this is our website, hummingbirdgardening.net. One of the pages is called the Gallery of Hummingbird Flowers, in which we show all the flowers in our yard in which I've been able to capture a picture of a hummingbird at the flower. And there have been some flowers I've not been able to capture that picture yet. I believe we have 76 different flowers on this page. On the home page, we have the dates and the times of our September garden tour. It is a Sunday and a Wednesday in September. You're welcome to come. It's just a drop-in event. We will have one of the hummingbird banders that's based in Wisconsin, Mickey O'Connor, who's an avian zookeeper at the Milwaukee Zoo. She's going to be here, I think, Wednesday only.
I believe so.
Wednesday only, the band Hummingbirds. And later on, right now, I just have the dates on there, but I'll place our address and our and a Google map to show you how to find our house. Trumpet creeper we put in, but that's kind of a fun slide. Hummingbird has the front half of its body buried into the flower. you see this as the iconic flower on greeting cards. We have this in our yard, and the reason I'm kind of hemming and hawing is it's a native plant, but it's very aggressive. You'll have suckers coming up in your yard easily 50 feet away from the mother plant.
Takes 5 years to.
Yeah,
bloom.
and it can take up to 5 years to bloom. So, and it attaches to structures via aerial rootlets. So you can have it grow on a fence, have it grow on a shepherd's hook, possibly, but I would not recommend planting it next to your house because it will eat your house. Do that.
So I just like to close with a quote from our favorite hummingbird video, Hummingbirds Up Close. That video is out of print, but you might be able to find it in the library. It's a great video. The hummingbirds have captured our hearts, and we embrace their picadillos together with the endless joy of their company. To feel the wash of the littlest angel's wings as it caresses the hand which just hung the feeder brings out the best in us, for no other bird can catch the sun and toss it back to us. So I hope that you'll hang a feeder or two, plant a native plant or maybe a salvia or two this summer, and really enjoy your journey of hummingbirds. Thank you so much.
So with that, we can entertain what, Brenna, maybe about 10 minutes of questions?
Sure, yes, bring on the questions. So if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask right away.
Well, while people are formulating their questions, one thing I forgot to mention earlier, I was talking about the deeply forked tail of the adult male. We have a hummingbird feeder in the front of our house over there. We're right now at our dining room table. We've got a contiguous dining room, living room. And over breakfast, saw a bird over there by the feeder, too far away to see if it had a gorget or not, but it had a deeply forked tail. So I automatically knew that was an after hatch year or adult male.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
A couple years ago, my daughter gave me a pair of quote unquote hummingbird houses. They're teardrop shaped wicker with a relatively large entry hole compared to a conventional birdhouse. I have yet to see a hummingbird in either one of them. I put one in the front of my yard and one in the back. I have a very small yard. It's an HOA community. I'm not very capable of making big gardens. So I do have a hummingbird house, and we do get occasional hummingbird visitors, but I'd like to see something happen with the houses. Any comments? Have you ever heard of them? Any comments on them?
Yeah, I have heard of them, and unfortunately, the ruby-throated hummingbird would not use that.
Okay.
So I, unfortunately, I would not hold your breath that hummingbird would ever use that. Hummingbirds, for the most part, certainly the ruby-throated hummingbirds, build their nests in trees.
Okay.
I've seen other species that will use artificial structures. Uh, we belong to the International Hummingbird Society, and the wife of the gentleman who started the society, she has a picture that she's shown many times at presentations. There's a welcome sign above the society, and in the letter O, a hummingbird has built a nest at the bottom of the O. I think the Western species maybe more often use artificial structures. The ruby throats, no, they only build their nests in trees.
Okay. Thanks.
I saw a question in the chat. Someone said that they're seeing fewer hummingbirds this year. We felt like we had fewer in June. All that rainy weather. I don't know if the weather had anything to do with it, but now our action is picking up. We see the most hummingbirds in late August and September because that's when they're migrating through.
Now, I heard from many other people, both in the city of Madison and Wisconsin in general, that especially during the month of June was extremely slow for hummingbirds. We've kept records here for 25 years, and it was definitely one of our slowest Junes that we ever experienced. They usually arrive in early May, and May was pretty normal, but then they just dropped off in June for some reason. And no one knows why, but you're not alone. That's the answer on the
Any other questions for right now? Because we'll also have some time for questions at the end of the next presentation. So if you think of anything between now and then, be sure to put it in the chat or write it down so that you remember to ask it a little bit later on. So I think we'll move into the next part of the evening, which is to talk about window collisions. So I'm gonna get that set up. Thank you very much, Kathi and Michael. That was really great. Okay, just make sure you can see my screen. Okay, it looks good. All right, well, thank you again, everyone. My name is, as I said, my name is Brenna. I work for Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance. And now that we have talked a lot about how to bring hummingbirds to our yards, how to feed them and provide them shelter and resources, we're gonna switch gears a little bit so that we are better equipped to protect our hummingbirds once they are in our yards. So in this part of the evening, we're talking about window collisions and how to prevent them in your yard. So just a quick detour, my organization is Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance. We used to be called Madison Audubon. We're a chapter of National Audubon, but a completely separate organization. And our mission is to protect and celebrate birds. We do that through 3 primary avenues. One is habitat restoration. So we have about 2,500 acres that we have restored or actively restoring to native habitats to benefit birds and the people who love them. We also have a full-fledged education and advocacy program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about one program that we do that kind of bridges both of those through citizen science called Bird Collision Corps. But we work a lot with our members to advocate for issues that matter to them, legislation and community topics that matter. So all of this work is done in Southern Wisconsin in these 10 different counties. So although our central office is in Madison, our 3 sanctuaries are in Columbia, Jefferson, and Rock County. And we also work with folks well beyond those areas. So it's really a great place, a good part of Wisconsin to be. Okay, so back to birds. We're talking tonight about window collisions and birds, but let's start with why does it matter? You know, a lot of folks, when they first get into this conversation about window collisions, have it in their minds that, you know, if a bird hits a window here and there, what's the problem? It just happens, right? So there are a couple things that I'm going to try and debunk about that thought process. And one of them is that birds really do matter. Their existence in our world matters. So they're wonderful things to just be around. There are studies that have been done that show that there are measurable and significant physical and mental benefits of people being able to just see and hear birds. They're wonderful things to be able to share with our kids or neighbors or friends. It's a great thing to be able to see birds nesting or visiting your yards. Birds just make life better. They're also really important to our ecosystem services. So you can see this ruby-throated hummingbird pollinating a flower here. Birds are also really great at seed dispersal. They're wonderful at eating other things, insects and small rodents and all sorts of things. They're also eaten by many things. So they're an important part of the food web. And birding is part of a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States. So sales and tourism relating to birding is important in Wisconsin and beyond. So having birds in the world really does matter in many different ways. So I'll just leave it there. So when it comes to window collisions, however, when it comes to birds existing in our world, window collisions are a really big problem for them. So this graphic here says that an estimated 599 million birds die every year in the United States. That's a conservative estimate that was made about 10 years ago through really rigorous scientific research. So a more common phrase that you'll hear is up to 1 billion birds die every year in the United States after hitting windows. And I'm going to put an asterisk. So there's some really interesting research that just came out that says that we're grossly underestimating that number as well. So that's a lot of birds, right? Whatever that number is, something between hundreds of millions up to billions of birds every single year in the United States are dying after hitting windows, and almost half of them happen at homes. So, you know, that's a big problem that we are causing and have control over, which I think is really empowering because we can do something about this issue. As far as problems that humans are causing birds directly, the #1 cause of bird deaths are outdoor cats, as Kathi mentioned a little bit earlier. The hummingbirds like to have high and tall flowers, sometimes because they know that there may be cats nearby. And right after that are window collisions. So in terms of the things that we're directly doing that cause birds harm, this is a really big issue. So back to that asterisk I mentioned, there was a paper that just came out in scientific literature in April. Actually, I think it was March. Yep, March 2024. That showed that based on research that they've done, that the number of birds that are dying after hitting windows is probably closer to 3.5 billion in the United States every single year. And you know, that's a jaw-dropping number. That's a lot of birds. And you know, we may not be conscious of how many birds that is, partly because that number is so huge, but also because in this study they found that half of window collisions leave no evidence that a collision happened. There's no bird that died immediately that's under the window. There's no smear on the window. The bird flies away, and 70% of those birds likely die from their injuries or because they become more susceptible to predation after that collision. So that's just a lot of preventable bird deaths that happen every single year. This is a really interesting paper in case you enjoy reading scientific literature. I recommend it. It's very interesting. So what about birds and windows is so problematic? Part of it has to do with the bird's physiology. So you can see in this image of the American redstart songbird that the eyes are placed on the sides of her head, right? This is pretty typical for songbirds. They need to be able to see when predators are coming, which is a very useful tool evolutionary wise, but it also really changes the way that depth is perceived, and especially when they're coming at something like glass. Birds also have hollow bones, which makes them light enough that they can fly, but makes them really susceptible to severe damage if they hit something solid. Birds also don't have the benefit of speaking the same language as us and having people teach us what something like this on the screen is. We learn from a really young age that something that is encased in a frame like this is a window. You can see through it, but there's something solid there. And even though we have learned this and we know it for many years, people still run into glass doors and glass windows, right? It happens. Birds don't have the benefit of having someone tell them what this is and teach them what this is. And so they just don't have that knowledge base that we do, the cues that we have of looking for that rectangle around the the glass. A lot of songbirds migrate at night, in the dead of night, during spring and fall migration. And for whatever reason that scientists haven't completely fleshed out yet, birds are attracted to light. So as they're migrating, big light pools, especially light that's pointed up or out, brings birds into these urban areas where they're more in contact with building areas. So migration at nighttime is really quite smart for songbirds because it allows them to avoid many predators that would be out during the day. And it's a very interesting thing to be able to see, can track it through next-rad radar technology. So you might recognize the image that you see here as what you would see on the weather radar, right? There's a network of radar stations that are set up throughout the country, which allows us to get weather forecasts. And there are very certain visual elements to what rain and weather fronts look like. So radar will bounce off of the water droplets and return to the radar station, and it's read in a certain way. Birds can do the same thing, or radar bounces off of birds in the same way, similar way. So you're able to read big pockets of birds during migration like this through the same technology as weather radar. So I'm going to show you a series of slides here that depicts migration during one fall evening, starting at 6:41 p.m. And you can see in this image that there's a rain front that's moving from about Ohio up through New York. There's some weather in the Seattle area, of course, some in Montana. So, you know, those are very obvious weather segments, but then you can also see these blobs of birds. So as we move through the night, you can see as it moves into darkness, now this is 9:40 p.m. Birds are really up in the air, migrating their way further south. We're now at 3:41, 4:41. Birds are starting to come down out of the sky. This is 6:41. And as the sun comes up, birds come down to be able to rest and refuel, and they end up seeing things that look like this, right? So they are in a new place, maybe surrounded by buildings. Maybe they were drawn in to an urban area because of the light pollution. But they see something like this, and we see it as a reflection of a tree, right? But what a bird sees is a place to find insects and maybe hide from a hawk coming by, or to be able to rest and sleep during the day so that they're able to make that migration again at night. Reflection is also a really big problem when birds are seeing these amazing places that we build for them in our yards reflected in the window, right? Building these habitats and these places for birds to use our resources that we provide for them is wonderful. And so we just have to be cognizant of when the reflection of those things is becoming dangerous for birds. There's also an arrangement of windows that is called a pass-through effect. So it's when there's one pane of windows that runs parallel with another pane, and it creates this illusion that a bird can fly right through them. And instead there's this solid glass that would prevent them from doing that. So, you know, there are some big fancy houses or big dorm buildings on campuses or skywalks in places like Wisconsin where it gets cold in the winter. These all create pass-through effects, or maybe it's, you know, a four-season patio in the back of the house, or maybe like at my house, you can look in the front living room window and look directly out the back sliding door into the backyard. You know, it's very common to have these arrangements in our houses, so I really encourage you to take a walk around your house and do a mini audit to see what you see in your window, sort of put on your bird lens and see if there are any areas that might be problematic for birds. And I can tell you, as someone who works doing this type of thing on a regular basis, that you never see buildings the same way again. Like once you see buildings with your bird lens, that those windows, it kind of sticks with you and you are just so much more aware of it. So as I mentioned earlier, Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance runs a citizen science program with our partners. And the program is called the Bird Collision Course. So this is a group of volunteers that goes out each spring and fall migration every day for 6 weeks in both spring and fall. And they are in search of evidence that birds have hit windows at certain buildings that we've assigned to them. 7 years of data that we've collected through this program. The 9 species that you see on the screen here are the ones that our volunteers pick up most often as victims of window collisions. So you can see the ruby-throated hummingbird is very high on the list. There's some other fan favorites here, the cedar waxwings, really great warblers and native sparrow species. The yellow-bellied sapsucker is one of my favorites. Dark-eyed juncos make this huge trek to spend winters in Wisconsin, and even some resident birds or pseudo-resident birds like robins and mourning doves that either stay over the winter in Wisconsin or they do short migrations. So there's a wide range in the behaviors and the body sizes of these species. And so I think this illustrates that it affects many different types of birds, not just the little ones, but many different kinds. However, hummingbirds really are at a higher risk than other species to hitting windows. So the chart that you see on the left is from a Loss et al. Paper in 2014, where they evaluate the risk of species hitting windows as compared to, like, if you imagine like an average baseline risk. And the ruby-throated hummingbird is 174 times more likely to hit windows than this baseline average species. Some of that has to do with how they are just flying really fast and often, right? They fly very quickly, which we know that they're acrobatic birds, but if they're trying to get to something that they see reflected in the window, there's no cause for them to slow or stop. They are also really fragile birds, and especially with their long beaks, if they hit a window head on, that is just a really hard thing to come back from. A lot of our volunteers that pick up these birds find that they have broken beaks, and most birds have head trauma when it comes to window collision injuries. So it's a really awful way to die. They also take really long migrations. They undergo really long migrations, I should say, each spring and fall. So they're just, statistically speaking, they're just moving more because they have to migrate north and south in order to breed and find food. And they're also a species that will come to feeders and will come to our garden plants. And we find them often in urban settings where there are a lot of buildings that are dangerous to them, homes and otherwise. So how do we make our windows bird safe? This picture that is showing here is an image from somewhere in Hawaii, and it just makes my heart drop into my stomach a little bit, because think about how big and beautiful those windows are and how many birds must hit them. You know, this is something that's, I think this is a quote that I really like because it speaks to, I think, the reason that we're all here tonight. It's a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson that says, "The purpose of life is not to be happy, it's to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well." So when we want to be able to look out a window because that's important for our own well-being, as it is justifiably. It's also important to think about how that could impact something else. And in the case of birds, that's, you know, collisions that we can prevent. So the next section of our presentation is talking about how we can prevent these collisions from happening so that we can really live out this value of being compassionate and making a difference. I also believe that you can be both happy and useful. So that's the goal here, right? So when we're making changes to our windows at home, there are two main goals. One is to reduce the transparency of the glass to avoid that pass-through situation, and also to reduce the reflection on the glass. So to start, we want to windows are the problem windows. Many people already know which windows are the worst ones at their house. If they have a problem window, you usually know it. If you don't know if you have a problem window, it's really good to pay attention. You might want to do a walk around your build or your home during spring and fall migration each morning, just to see if there are any birds. If you hear a bird hit your window, maybe you make a note of it. Most birds that hit windows and fly away later do die, and so it's just important to be able to jot these things down and have somewhat of an informed approach. So you start with those problem windows first. Most likely you don't have to do all the windows in your house, just usually one or two or more. So next would be to find a style that you like, of course. Except for the problem with this is that there are just hundreds and hundreds of styles to choose from. It can be really overwhelming, and they come with different price tags and different longevity and different looks to them. So what we're going to do here tonight is talk about a few of them to hopefully get you inspired and, you know, be able to give you some resources to explore more if you want. Whatever window treatment you choose should follow the 2-inch rule. So you see there's an asterisk on here. I guess I'm all about those asterisks tonight, but all of the window treatments that we talk about tonight will follow this 2-inch rule except for one, and I'll talk about that asterisk one. But the 2-inch rule is when you have something on the window, it should be no more than 2 inches away from the next thing on the window. So you can see in this image of the door and the windows that there's a dot pattern, and those dots are spaced out 2 inches from each other. It's an offset pattern, so it has kind of an interesting look, and it's hard to tell with the spacing, but those are a 2-inch spacing pattern. That's based on research done by the American Bird Conservancy that found that that 2-inch rule drastically reduces the number of window collisions, because birds are really acrobatic, right? They'll try and squeak through whatever opening they think they can make it through. And especially really little birds like hummingbirds can fit through small spaces. So that 2-inch rule is geared to cover all of the birds, including hummingbirds, from preventing or from hitting windows. And whatever treatment you pick should ideally go on the outside of the glass, because then you are reducing both the transparency of the glass and the reflection seen on the glass if it's on the outside. If all you can do is put it on the inside, that's better than nothing, but ideally the treatment goes on the outside. And then if you find that you've solved the problem at your house, that's great. But if you hear or see more collisions happening at another window, you repeat this process as needed. So how do we know if a product is bird safe? Like, anyone can say something is bird safe or eco-friendly. But the way that we know is through this thing called glass testing tunnels. So American Bird Conservancy, again, this national nonprofit that does a ton of research on this and other things, but talking about collisions tonight. So they are just the experts on this. They have these stations. There are 2 stations that look like this, that have this long, narrow shed. both of these glass testing tunnels are located at bird banding stations. So there are already researchers who are handling a bird and are trained to do so at these sites. And so they work collaboratively with those banders. So you can see that there's a researcher on one end of the tunnel, and at the other end, there are two panes of glass. One has a window treatment on it, and the other doesn't. And then in front of both of those windows is a mist net so that no birds get injured in this process. So once the birds have been banded and processed and weighed and everything, they take the ones that are least stressed out and they bring it to the tunnel and they send it down the tunnel one time. And that bird has to make a choice then, right? It has to either choose toward the clear glass that it probably thinks is just a clear path out the tunnel, or it has to go toward the one that has the window treatment on it. So based on how the bird chooses, and then they repeat this process with many other birds, come up with what's called a material threat factor. And the lower that threat factor is, the better. So for example, if something has a material threat factor of 1, it means that the bird chose to fly toward that window treatment only 1 out of 100 times. Lisa, I just got to notice that my internet is unstable. Have you noticed any hiccups with that? Is it sounding okay?
I can hear it, but every now and then you do have a little bit of a delay.
Okay. All right. Hopefully that sorts itself out, but let me know if maybe I should turn off my video or something. Maybe I'll do that just in case. Stop video. Okay, let's try this and see if that helps. Okay, so all of the window treatments that I show you tonight will have a material threat factor associated with them so that you're able to kind of line up the different factors that go into choosing what window treatment you want, the look of it, the price of it, and the effectiveness of it. So the first one that we're going to talk about tonight is the good old-fashioned insect screen. These things are super effective. They have a material threat factor of 1, which is the lowest you can get besides, you know, just like plain brick. These are really effective because they reduce that reflection that's seen on the glass, as you can see in the picture on the left-hand side. The difference between the windows that have and don't have insect screens. They also provide a bit of a bounce if a bird does come at it, which is unlikely, but it would be able, it's not a hard hit. And it also is very clear that that's not something they can just fly straight through, that there's something in front of it that breaks up that transparency. So some windows, like crank out casement windows, are they usually have insect screens on the inside of the glass, right? And so in that case, even though you have an insect screen, it's not on the outside, so it's not breaking up that reflection that the bird is seeing. So it may be that you would still need a different type of window treatment on the outside if that's your problem window. But a lot of windows come with insect screens. If you're getting replacement windows, you can ask for them to have insect screens and then they'll come bird safe from the get-go. In some cases, we just heard from someone in the earlier presentation that she had to proactively ask for insect screens on all of her windows when she got new ones because it wasn't a default thing, but it was worth the small extra price tag. So the next thing is another easy fix. This is design work done with tempera paint or oil-based markers. So tempera paint is a washable material that you can get at craft stores for, you know, like $3. You can get them in all different types of colors. You can paint your own designs on there. It's great for people with kids or grandkids, or if you have an artistic flair. This is a really fun way to treat your windows. Same with oil-based markers. The difference between the two is that tempera paint is washable. So if it rains, your design starts to look very sad and it has to be redone. Oil-based markers are more weather resistant. I was just talking with someone earlier today how they've had their oil-based design up for 2 years now, and it hasn't faded at all. The drawback is that to remove it, you would need to use some kind of acetone nail polish remover. So pros and cons of both. The material threat factor on this one is virtually impossible to calculate because it depends on how someone does it, right? Like if they follow the 2-inch rule, the material threat factor will be great compared to if they don't. So you can't really give this one a score, but very effective if done well. And also very pretty, I think. The dots are a very popular option right now. I know a lot of people who have tried this and they really enjoy it. The look of it, as well as the process for putting it on, isn't too bad. So these are dots that come in a roll that basically looks like Scotch tape. And they provide you with a little box that has the roll, a measuring tape, a squeegee, some instructions, and you unroll the tape and it has the dots already adhered to the tape. So it comes pre-measured 2 inches apart for each of the dots. And so you press it onto your window, you really squeeze it on there with the squeegee. And as you pull back the tape from the glass, just the dots remain. And then you go down to the next level, 2 inches down from there, and you repeat the process, and eventually you have your window done. There's also a newer product that they offer that has more dots in a sheet, so you can do more of your window in one fell swoop. So this product is made by Feather Friendly as well as Kaleidoscape. Those are 2 different companies. There are a number of other ones that make them as well, but they are rated for 10 years. And there are buildings that have had them up for much longer than that that are still going strong. And oh, thanks, Lisa, for putting those links into the chat. They're also semi-permanent. So that means that, you know, a pressure washer, Wisconsin blizzard, or heat wave, or rain or wind, whatever we get here, these dots will survive it. They're like the cockroaches of weather, of dots. So they are a really good option that are quite popular these days. Some people ask if it really, what's the word? Ruins the view from the inside. You know, you have these nice big windows so that you can look out in your garden and watch your hummingbird feeder maybe. And what I've heard from people, and seems to be the general consensus, is that you see them at first, but sort of like an insect screen, your eyes learn really quickly to look past them. So it doesn't ruin things for long. It takes some getting used to it, and then you're used to it, and it's almost like they're not there for you. But these have a material threat factor of 7 or so. It depends on the company, but these are very good. And then the last option that we'll talk about tonight are these paracord / Zen / bird saver curtains. The idea with this is that these curtains are made out of paracord, which is a slippery nylon material that is used in parachutes. So the string doesn't tangle, it doesn't decay over the course of a winter, it doesn't get all caught up in debris, leaves blowing past. These are a really nice option for outdoor use for all of those reasons. And they come in many different colors that you can choose from. The idea is that you create a horizontal bar on the top, and then you tie your vertical strings that go in front of the window. You tie those to your horizontal bar, and then you hang that up over your window. So you don't attach it to anything at the bottom, which means that those strings can kind of float in the breeze. And that's what gives them their effectiveness. So, you know, these are spaced out a bit more than 2 inches, you might notice. So this is my asterisk item. So these are spaced out, what, 3 inches or 4 inches. And that's because they're not attached to the glass like stickers are. They're 3D. And they're oftentimes moving in the wind. So that dynamic feature is really important. You can make your own by buying the paracord, pre-shrinking it at home, measuring your size of your window, hanging it up, and like the paracord you can buy online for pretty inexpensive. I bought a roll of 1,000 feet for I think $25 or something. And the Acopian Bird Savers website that Lisa just put the link in the chat for, thanks Lisa, they give you great instructions on how to make them. They're great videos and charts for how many cords of what length to cut. They do a really nice job with this, I think because their goal is to save birds. So they tell you exactly how to do it, or you can measure your window and put that into their system and order a kit from them. They'll make it for you, put it in a box, send it to you, and all you have to do is hang it up. So this is a really great resource. The company is called Acopian Bird Savers, and the link is birdsavers.com. Okay, so just a quick story with this one. My friend Susan, who took these photos, she has this great backyard, and a red-breasted nuthatch hit her window one day. And so she said, that's enough, I need to put up a window treatment. So she put up this Acopian Bird Saver. She made it herself. And she had it up for 2 years with no collisions. And then she had to paint her house. So she had to take down her curtain, and within 45 minutes, a bird hit a window. And so, you know, they finished the job as soon as they could. She hung that curtain back up as soon as she was able to, and she hasn't had a collision since. And I think that really speaks to just how very instantly effective some of these window treatments can be, that you put it up and you have solved the problem in an afternoon. It's absolutely amazing. At least you've solved the problem at your house. This has a really great material threat factor of 5. So what are a few things that don't work, or that don't work as well? Many of us have seen these silhouettes of a hawk sold in stores or hung up in coffee shops or whatever. So these don't work as well because birds really quickly learn that that's not a real hawk. And there's also a lot of glass around it that the bird would try to get to. Well, not get to the glass, but the reflection of what they're seeing. So in order for these silhouettes or shapes to be effective, they would have to follow the 2-inch rule, right? And that means that you'd have so many of those silhouettes up that this would not be a window anymore, which doesn't benefit you. That's not a sustainable choice, because I'm sure you want your window. So there are just a lot better ways to spend your time and money than these silhouettes. Decals that are spaced out more than 2 inches also reduce the effectiveness. You may have some luck in reducing collisions, but it probably won't solve the problem if you're not following that 2-inch rule, unless you're using the bird saver curtain. So just try to keep that in mind. And then when you're putting a window treatment on the inside of the glass, in some cases, that's all you can do. And that's fine. If you have window shades that you can keep half open, or somehow put a cue on the glass from the inside that there's something there, that will be better than nothing. But ideally, the window treatment goes on the outside. So we're here tonight in part to talk about hummingbirds and their friends. So what do we do about our feeders, our bird feeders, and our gardens that we're designing to bring these birds in? Something to keep in mind is the 3 or 30 rule, which is, it's a rule of thumb, right? It's the idea with this is that your bird feeder or bird bath or fabulous garden should be within 3 feet of your house, or more than 30, because if it's within 3 feet, the bird's not going fast enough to mortally injure itself or kill itself. And if it's more than 30 feet, it's less likely to come at your window in the first place. So regardless of whether you're doing that 3 or 30 rule, if you have feeders and bird baths and other features that would be attractive to birds that are reflected in your windows, it really is the responsible thing to do to treat those windows so that we're not creating mini death traps for our beloved birds that we're bringing in. So you can see in this window or this picture that they're using the Ethiopian bird savers, and they have multiple bird feeders in houses nearby that they have successfully brought birds to and supported. So regardless of whether you're using dots or the paracord or insect screens, or just kind of re-envisioning the way that things are designed, like this railing that's designed to be see-through, instead of glass, they've used wire, which is, you know, a nice alternative. It's worth the extra effort because these birds are really important to us personally, to our communities, and to our world. So thank you so much for tuning in for this. Here are a bunch of other resources that you're welcome to go to. That top link there has a list, it has a bunch of stuff, but notably it has a list of contractors that my volunteers and I have called in southern Wisconsin and asked, do you put up window treatments? Can people hire you to do this at their homes? And they say, yes, we do that. So the list of contractors available to hire is on that website if you don't want to or can't do it yourself. There are a bunch of other resources here, including Save Our Songbirds and American Bird Conservancy, that last link. And I think with that, I will wrap that up, and I'd be happy to take any questions. If anyone has a question, I'd love to hear them. So you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it into the chat. There are a few people on the call tonight that are part of our Bird Collision Corps program. And so I just want to give a quick shout out to those folks. I see Greg and Mary and Laura on here. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Any questions?
Brenna, this is
Yeah.
okay, so I'm not sure I understand, like with the tempera paint, for example, why couldn't you paint that on the inside of your window?
Well, you could, but the tempera paint is opaque. Let me see if I can find that link again for the slide. So the paint is opaque, and a matte, right? So it breaks up and reduces the reflection seen on the outside of the glass. So if you put it on the inside, it will really do a lot for signaling, especially if it's a colorful one like that rainbow design. But there will be cases where the reflection seen on the outside of the glass will trump whatever is seen, I guess would be seen from the tempera paint on the inside.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Any others? In case anyone was really wondering and just too shy to ask, one of our great achievements with Bird Collision Corps, I'm just going to skip ahead, is that the city of Madison in 2020, we worked with the city and a bunch of other partners to put together and pass through the state's first bird safe glass ordinance, which means that any building 10,000 square feet or more has to use bird safe glass if they're using a bunch of glass. So that makes it required. It's not optional, but it's required. Anything that was approved prior to October 2020 wouldn't have to have that, but any new buildings going up after that would have to use that bird safe glass. As you can imagine, the city was sued almost immediately by a group of developers, but the Dane County judge upheld the ordinance a couple of years later. The group of developers appealed that decision, and then the appeals court upheld the ordinance, and after that, it was in the clear, which allowed other municipalities to move forward with similar efforts. And in fact, in February, Middleton just passed the same exact matching ordinance as Madison's. And so now both Madison and Middleton have these bird safe glass ordinances in place, which is a great win for birds and a really nice precedent set in Wisconsin. So as you drive around Madison, you see these new buildings going up. If they're going up right now or recently, they would have to have that pattern in the glass, and that pattern is called frit. So it's a pattern that's baked or etched into the glass. So it's done during the production process, and so the glass is installed already bird safe. There are also different ways of achieving bird safe design. You can use solar benefits or films or shades or screens and all kinds of things. But if you want that glass building look, then buildings in Madison need to have fritted glass in their buildings. So Laura asked, what should you do if you find a bird outside your window that has hit the window and is still alive? Great question. So the best thing to do is to see if you can get it and put it into a paper grocery bag rolled up or a shoebox covered, someplace that's safe and cool and dark, and take that bird to the Dane County Humane Society's Wildlife Center. Studies have shown that most birds that hit windows have some injury. Some of those injuries can be treated. So even though a lot of folks like to, and there was a time I did this too, where we like to tell ourselves like, oh, it flew away, or if I just leave it for a while, it'll be okay. That's oftentimes not the case. And that bird without help will likely die. So if you can bring it in, that's the best route to go. That's a great question. Any others? Well, if you think of any other questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you all so much for tuning in tonight. I hope you learned something, and thank you so much to Michael and Kathi and Lisa for hosting this with me. It's been a really wonderful evening. And if you have any feedback or maybe pictures of your hummingbird garden that you put in this summer or window treatments that you put up, we'd love to see them. So please reach out if you have those. Thank you all very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.